This is my first video of 2021. It's January the 5th. And there's a monk who's lived in Burma for over 20 years. Now he's living in Northern California, and he's agreed to be on my show. Welcome, Venerable Pannobhasa Mahatera.
Yeah, hail Brian.
I want to ask you about the spread of Buddhism throughout Asia and the Aryan role, how Aryans or whites were involved in the spread of Buddhism, or Aryans. I wouldn't exactly say they're all whites. So tell us about that.
All righty. Yeah, well, it kind of, I suppose I should start with like a very brief history of how Buddhism started. And the earliest roots of it aren't like Indo-European or Aryan. I mean, they probably started, just like the earliest philosophical roots of Buddhism started in the prehistoric Indus Valley civilization, which is one of the 5 great prehistoric civilizations. Like the archaeologists nowadays say it's probably like the 3rd big urban civilization after Mesopotamia and Egypt. So it's went back, thousands of years BC. And they had an atheistic religious system, apparently. It was kind of a philosophical system based on karma, like contaminating our soul and holding it down, and you're supposed to purify yourself of all of your karma so that your spirit can rise up. Sort of like Jainism is like a purer form of that than Buddhism, although Buddhism has been influenced by that. Like when the Indo-Aryans invaded India, like around 1500 BC, they're speaking Vedic Sanskrit and they're worshiping the Vedic gods and all that. The people that already lived in India at that time were already following, this older kind of religious system or philosophical system with it was pretty much atheistic, and the world is a bad place, and you're trying to escape from the world, kind of a thing. And so the Buddha himself, we've already talked about this before, where the Buddha himself was probably Indo-European. So he was, supposedly the Aryan race, and like the Indo-Europeans that invaded India were literally Aryans. They're called Indo-Aryans. They called themselves Arya, and like we already discussed before, like the 4 noble truths of Buddhism, or the 4 Aryan truths, and a Buddhist saint is called an Arya, and just the word Arya in Pali means something like noble, because it was like the noble ruling class, because the Indo-Aryans invaded India and became like the new ruling class. So, it was like the Shudras, the lowest class, were like the Aboriginal inhabitants that weren't Indo-European, and then the higher class, the other 3 castes were Indo-European mostly. So anyway, so it became popularized. It was founded, Buddhism itself was founded by an Indo-European, probably. Gautama Buddha was probably Indo-European. And then it spread through like the Ganges Valley of northern India, which was mostly Indo-European, or at least like the ruling class was Indo-European, and probably most of the converts and the monks were Indo-European. And it stayed that way for a few hundred years. You had Ashoka, who sent out missionaries in all the different directions. And then Buddhism started spreading up into Central Asia, like what is now Eastern Iran and like Afghanistan. And around 4th century BC, Alexander the Great, he kind of conquered the entire area. He got as far as like the Indus River. And so part of India at the time was under Greek rule. And the Greeks, they took over, what is now Afghanistan, and parts of northwestern India, what is now Pakistan. That was ruled by the Greeks for a short time. And then the Mauryan Empire kind of conquered back the Indian parts. And you had like the Persians, or I can't remember if it was the Persians or the Parthians, but it was, the Parthians spoke like a Persian language anyway. So they conquered a lot of the other eastern parts back, but there was still like the Greek kingdom in Bactria, and they made later inroads back into India again after the Mauryan Empire was in decline. But the Greeks finally got wiped out in that area. First, there was a tribe of, they were a Persian-speaking people called the Sakas. So they were kind of like Scythians. They were closely related to the Scythians. And they also were Aryan. I mean, just literally, they called themselves Arya also. So they kind of conquered the Greeks. And then shortly after that, there's a group of people called the Kushans, or also the Chinese called them the Yuezhi, who invaded from the north down into Bactria and then like formed this empire. And they also were Indo-European. I think they may have spoken like a Persian language too, so that would make them literally Aryan also. And they had this huge empire that went as way over into China, and they were Indo-European, so they may have had a lot of mixed blood, because wherever the Indo-Europeans would invade, they would just become the ruling class. I mean, they wouldn't just like completely exterminate the people that were already living there. So there's always going to be a certain amount of mixing.
Yeah.
But
you know what I'm thinking would be good if you shared screen right now, we found some maps of India and China and Pakistan. If you could, while you're talking, if you share screen with some maps, that would give a good visual to the audience, because I'm trying to figure out where you're talking.
Yeah, well, I didn't prepare for that, so yeah, maybe we could, whoever edits the video can just fit them in.
Unless you want to take a break right now, or just go online and pick like.
It would be too much work, and I don't want to do it. So.
Okay, you just thought. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, there was like an empire. It was the Kushan Empire, or also called the Yuezhi, and they used to be farther east. I mean, they were even more towards China, because even parts of China now were originally occupied by people that were like genetically European. That's where like the Tarim mummies with the red hair and everything came from in the pyramids or whatever. They were
like pyramids. Think about these pyramids in China. That's very important and mysterious. Like, who the hell built these pyramids? That's very impressive.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Tarim mummies were they were Tocharian. They were Indo-European. So then you had another group of like dark-haired, dark-eyed nomads who were there's a good chance that they were like the original Huns, and they were defeated by the Chinese and driven away from the borders of China, and then they were driving other groups in front of them, just getting away from them, because the Huns were like really gnarly. So these Kushans, or the Yuezhi, who eventually invaded India and started up this Kushan Empire in the northwest, they were pretty much driven there, getting away from the Huns. So anyway, you had this empire, like pretty much centered in like northern Afghanistan, but it was this huge Central Asian empire of these people called the Kushans, and they were Indo-European, and they pretty much all converted to Buddhism. So they were like right on the caravan routes and everything between east and west, and they were a relatively large and powerful empire. And so it was largely because of these Indo-European Kushan Buddhists that missionaries were able to make it into China, like Buddhist missionaries. So it was largely because of this Indo-European empire in Central Asia, because Central Asia was almost all Buddhist up until the Muslims started killing them off or forcibly converting them to Islam.
Can I ask what sect of Buddhism and what century was this?
Oh, the century would be very early Christian era.
I think it was still the quasi-Theravadins, right? First were the quasi.
All right, there was one of the first big kings, the Kushan kings of like northwestern India, was named Kanishka, and he was a Buddhist, but I think he favored the Sarvastivadins. He wasn't the Theravada Buddhist. And there was supposedly I think it was supposed to be like a third great council of Buddhism, and they were trying to get to the bottom of what did the Buddha really teach, and they're trying to kind of conciliate the different sects, because Buddhism had divided up into like 30 different sects by that time. This was even before Mahayana. So because it was done in the Northwest under the reign of King Kanishka, and he favored the Sarvastivadins. The Great Council came out saying, you know, the Sarvastivadins are essentially right. So then all the other sects of Buddhism just rejected it and didn't count it as an official Great Council. So it never.
Oh,
really,
I never knew that. But for the audience, you know, the audience knows today it was Theravada and Mahayana. Sarvastivadin is close to what we think of as Theravada, right? It wasn't the radical heresy of the Mahayana.
No, it's very closely related to Theravada. In fact, like if you read the official history of the Second Council, no, wait, the Third Council that was during the time of Ashoka. So the one I was talking about would have been a Fourth Council. So I made a mistake there. But they're talking about how they were like fake Buddhists who had infiltrated the Sangha, and they were all kicked out and they were sent away to the Northwest or something like that. And probably what that really means is that you just had Theravada had like a Sarvastivadin sect within it. You know, they were like monks that didn't agree on the correct interpretation of like Abhidhamma, that kind of thing. And so the Sarvastivadins had a completely different Abhidhamma Pitaka than the Theravadins had. And so one of the main purposes of the Great Council under Ashoka was just straightening this out, how you had like these two different factions going on in Theravada. And it turned into like a purge where the Orthodox Theras purged the Sarvastivadins out of the Theravadan Sangha. And so they kind of set up their new headquarters in the Northwest, which was in the Kushan Empire.
It's so fascinating. So
Yeah.
they might have been even closer to the truth, because as you and I agree, the Abhidharma is not that important. And the Buddha didn't teach it. Something started a couple centuries after the Buddha, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure exactly what the Sarvastivadin Abhidharma says, although Sarvastivada literally means like the doctrine of all exists. So the main difference between Sarvastivada and Theravada is that the Sarvastivadins believe that past, present, and future all exist, which is kind of like Einsteinian space-time. Whereas the Theravadins say only now exists, and the past doesn't exist anymore, and the future doesn't exist yet.
Oh, that's cool. So that's getting into a little bit of abstraction. Like, does it really matter that much, right?
Yeah, and also the Sarvastivadins, they had other differences from Theravada. Like Theravada says, you know, absolutely everything is impermanent. You know, it's like even like an atom, it's flickering on and off, you know, 1 trillion times a second. So it's like a different atom every moment. Whereas the Sarvastivadins were saying that the fundamental elements, the dharmas, you know, like Abhidhamma talks about, those are permanent. It's just the combinations are impermanent. So like an atom would last forever, you know, it'd just be essentially unchanging, but just the different combinations it gets into would be like always impermanent and changing. So there are differences like that.
But to me, that sounds like the Buddha's simile of the arrow. You know, a guy gets shot by an arrow and asks all these, don't take out the poison arrow until you answer all these questions. Like, the Buddha would probably say, like, so what? It doesn't matter. That's not worthy of a schism over that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he wouldn't be, he probably wouldn't have a very high opinion of any of these doctrines or dogmas about, you know, how the mind works or anything like that, really. You know, he'd probably keep it simple. You know, like the oldest Buddhist texts are almost skeptical. You know, it's like you shouldn't be cluttering up your mind with all these thoughts and beliefs and everything. You should make it as clear as possible. Just wide awake and just having like a simple, quiet mind. And that's the best way to break through like the veil of illusion or samsara or whatever and get into ultimate reality.
You know, maybe after a few centuries of sitting around thinking, contemplating, the monks would come up with all these minutiae of detail and have to write it all down and sort of debate it over.
Yeah, well, I mean, most monks even, they're just not ready for enlightenment yet. And really to have your mind like wide awake and silent can be scary because your ego isn't there. It's like your ego dissolves. And most people would be scared of that and don't want it. And so they're more interested in just memorizing the texts and chanting and bowing to the statue and lighting the candles and the incense and all of that, and just coming up with all these philosophical beliefs that they can cling to. And, you know, they're most of them aren't even really trying to become enlightened in this life. They just think, well,
Hey, wait a minute. Hey, I resemble that remark.
yeah, well, they just want to believe like the true doctrine, which will set them up. It'll give them good karma and set them up to make it easier next time. But really, you know, it's not really the true dogma. It's just these philosophical concepts that these philosopher, scholar monks have cooked up. And a lot of what's just considered to be, you know, fundamental Buddhist philosophy is that kind of stuff. Excuse me.
Yeah, I guess I took you on a tangent. You're saying so the Savastivars, they headed a bit more northwest to get out of Dodge, and then they got caught up with later, I guess.
So there was a lot of that in like Central Asia, but I assume there were probably lots of other sects because, as a general rule, the Buddhists got along pretty well with each other. You know, like the big universities like Nalanda. I've been to the ruins of some of those places, and you can see that you know, the ruins, it's not just one big monastery. It's like a bunch of different monasteries, each with its own sima, like its own ecclesiastical boundary. So the monks from each sect would have their own section where they would stay, you know, they do their formal acts of the Sangha together. But then, you know, they'd still be going to classes and that kind of thing, you know, mixed together. So, you know, they weren't intolerant like, you know, like Christians have been in the past, in the historical past, or, you know, other religions where it's like you have to believe the exact same thing as us or we're going to kill you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think of the Catholics, the Protestants, the Martin Luther, and all the people killed over that, you know.
Really early Christianity, I mean, it was just like riots in the streets over stuff like you know, the Holy Spirit. So one group is saying the Holy Spirit comes directly from the Father, and another group is saying no, the Holy Spirit comes indirectly from the Father through the Son. And it's like, you know, if you believe the wrong way, you're going to burn in hell forever and ever, and we're going to destroy you. And it was like you just couldn't have two different groups of Christians believing these two different things about the Holy Spirit, or whether Jesus had one nature, human and divine combined, or whether he had two natures, a human nature and a divine nature. And they're like, you know, just people just raging and fighting over this stuff, and there's no way they could possibly really know even. So I mean, that's the kind of the intolerant route that the Christians took, and finally it was just they got this monopoly, this monoculture, especially in Western Europe. It was all just, you know, Roman Catholicism and the Nicene Creed and all that. But in India and they got along, you know, the Buddhists and the Hindus got along. They'd debate with each other. They might not like each other very much. They might think the other side is foolish and deluded or whatever. But still, I mean, they'd have debates, and they'd go to the same universities, and you know, they got along. You know, they allowed each other to exist. So
I think I compare that today with Antifa and the communists that I meet in the streets sometimes. So they're afraid of debate, because with debate, you know, they're obviously going to lose. So they don't tolerate debate.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the way the first it was Christianity, which was like sort of the progressive movement of Hebrew origin in ancient Roman civilization, and now we've got Marxism, which is like the progressive movement of Hebrew origin in the modern West, you know, and it has the same kind of hysterical intolerance. You know, it's everyone has to believe what we say, or they're evil and they got to be just purged or destroyed or whatever.
Abate, Black Lives Matter. If you don't believe that, then we'll have to discuss this later.
Yeah. So long as it's not all capitalized, it might be okay.
Yeah. We have to meet out in the parking lot if you don't believe Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. So like Central Asia was probably lots of different sects of Buddhism, and it was all predominantly Buddhist. It was Indo-European populations there mostly. You know, you had the Tokharians, probably some of those still like way like in the Tarim Basin, and then you had the Kushans and other like Iranian speaking peoples just all over the place in that area. And then you had the Indian speaking peoples in India, and it was
where's
all
the
like
Tarim Basin you mentioned? Where's that?
The Tarim Basin, I don't know what province of China it's in. It's north of the Himalaya mountains. It's in like in western China. And that's as far as the Indo-Europeans got in ancient times. And it was the group of Indo-Europeans that lived there were called Tokharians, and they had their own language, and they had walled cities and everything. They had their little kingdoms and stuff there. But eventually, they just got overwhelmed by all the like the Turkic and Mongols and that kind of thing, where there's just so many of these barbarian waves of these horse riding violent nomads were just sweeping back and forth across the like the steppes, I guess it's called. That
Reminds me of Europe today,
got wiped out.
The whites are getting overwhelmed in Europe today. Similar thing.
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, even the homeland of the Indo-Europeans, assuming that it was like the Pontic steppe, like north of the Black Sea, and like the Caucasus Mountains and everything, that all just got completely overwhelmed by, you know, Turks and Huns and Mongols and all these you know, Asiatic nomadic tribes that were sweeping westwards. They just kind of wrecked it. So that's just the way it goes. Everything that has a beginning has an end. But yeah, I mean, almost all of Central Asia was Buddhist up until Islam came along and started their amazing explosion outwards and started the first caliphate and all that. So that's how China especially was converted to Buddhism, is just because of these Indo-European tribes living in Central Asia that were all Buddhists, and the caravan routes and everything all went through Buddhist countries, and you had Buddhist missionaries even going to China and trying to convert people, and eventually even Bodhidharma, who was he was an Indian, he was like a high caste Brahmin, supposedly. Yeah, they went to China, and supposedly he started Zen, like the first Chinese patriarch of Zen.
So that's impressive that Bodhidharma, they think he had red hair, so he must have been Aryan. Or did he have blue eyes as well?
Some of them did, I assume.
What about Bodhidharma himself?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you would even know for sure. I don't know what the legends say about him. Maybe.
Do you think, like, is there any question, was he a real historical character, or is he just an idea or a concept?
Bodhidharma?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a good chance. I mean, most of these legends about some famous person, you know, they're based on a real person. He might not be the same as, you know, the legends say about him. You know, there probably was a Hercules and an Achilles and all that in the West also. But, you know, like King Arthur and all that, you know, they're all ultimately based on some historical figure. Although whether Bodhidharma was as enlightened and wise as he is claimed to be is, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, all you've got is legends, really. It's not even really history. You know, you don't have any facts or evidence or anything really, other than just these legends and traditions about him that are thousands or, you know, well over 1,000 years old.
So what century was he? Around 1000 AD? What century was he?
Oh, he'd be before that. I'm not exactly sure when Bodhidharma.
Like 500 AD, something like that?
Yeah, somewhere thereabouts, approximately, give or take.
So I think Zen masters after him, there's much more known historically about following Zen masters, but not too much known about Bodhidharma himself, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, he was the first Zen master, supposedly, and so there wasn't really a strong Zen tradition to record everything. You know, it's kind of like Jesus. I mean, you talk about the lost years of Jesus and everything when he was young, but really, I mean, he just wasn't famous yet, so there wouldn't be anything recorded about him until he gets famous. Then people want to know stuff about him, and then they don't really know, and so they just have to make stuff up or just believe, you know, whatever kind of rumors they hear and just consider that to be reliable because there isn't anything better.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the following Zen patriarchs, once Zen became famous, they would record the lives of these other patriarchs. That would make sense.
Yeah, and even like a lot of the legends, like the whole legend of the I think it's the sixth patriarch, Hui Neng. He's like the last Chinese patriarch of Zen, and yeah, I used to. There's a sutra. There's a Mahayana Chinese sutra, the Sutra of Hui Neng, also called the Platform Sutra, and it's supposed to be just like the recorded. It's like a transcript of a Dhamma talk given by the sixth patriarch Hui Neng, and it has like there's like this imperial scribe who recorded the whole thing, and he's got his name there, and you know, it gives the details of the Dharma hall, and you know, and so I figured, well, that's about as reliable as you're going to get. I mean, with regard to like a Buddhist scripture or something, instead of legends or something that was, you know, handed down orally for centuries before it was even written down. I mean, this is just like a written transcript written by like a government clerk, you know, so that should be reliable. And then yeah, years later, I read a different translation of the same sutra by a guy named Yampolsky, I think. And I read this in Burma, and it's like a different version, because like I think it was like around 1970 or something, they found an older version of this same sutra in a cave in China somewhere. You know, it was like a Buddhist monastic kind of cave or something, and it's very different from like the usual version. And there's this long editorial preface to the translation. The translator is talking about how probably Huineng wasn't even really the sixth patriarch, where, you know, the whole story is that Huineng was like this illiterate peasant who became enlightened while walking through a town and hearing a monk chanting I think it was the Diamond Sutra, and he just like boom, just got Satori or whatever and became enlightened. So then he goes to the monastery where the fifth patriarch lives, and they just put him grinding rice in the kitchen. I mean, they just put him to work in the kitchen. He's just like this illiterate, you know, barbarian peasant guy. They don't consider him to be anything great. You know, they can't tell that he's enlightened or anything. So the fifth patriarch's getting old, and he's going to choose his successor. He's going to choose the next patriarch, and everyone just figures it's going to be the senior monk, like the assistant, you know, like the junior, you know, like assistant monk, you know, like the right hand man of the patriarch. He's just, you know, he's just going to be it. So, you know, nobody really challenges that. But the sixth or the fifth patriarch, he says, just everyone who wants to be considered to be the next patriarch should offer up a verse. And the assistant monk, you know, who everyone figured was going to be the next patriarch anyway, he knew that he wasn't enlightened. He knew he wasn't really worthy, and so he's kind of embarrassed, and so he just writes a verse on the wall in the middle of the night, kind of anonymous. And still, according to the legend, the patriarch, the next day he sees it, he realizes that whoever wrote that wasn't really enlightened yet, but he has everybody memorize it. You know, it's good. It's like our mind is like a mirror and our body is like the mirror stand, and carefully we wipe the mirror hour by hour so that no dust will alight, you know, keeping the mirror clean. You know, the mirror is supposed to be our mind. And finally, Huineng, you know, the illiterate enlightened peasant barbarian, he sees it. He can't read it, so he has like a monastery attendant read it out to him, and he also immediately recognizes that it's whoever wrote it wasn't enlightened. So he has the kid or whoever it was write like a different version, which is, you know, there really is no Bodhi stand, there is no mirror. Since everything is void, where could the dust alight? You know, it's like this really Zen Mahayana stuff. And so then the fifth patriarch realizes that he's the one, you know, he's the one who is worthy. But he also knows that nobody's going to accept this illiterate peasant barbarian becoming the next patriarch. So at night, secretly, he gives him the begging bowl and the robe that is like the symbols of being the patriarch, and just tells him to go and just go away and hide, because they're going to come after him and try and get the stuff back. And so anyway, in this Yampolsky's book, he's explaining that probably what really happened was that the junior assistant monk probably really was declared the sixth patriarch, but his school died out pretty quickly afterwards, whereas the southern school that was founded by Huineng, you know, it struck traction and really took off and became Zen. And so they just kind of changed the details of the story so that, you know, it was given to him secretly at night and all this kind of thing. And he was the last patriarch. He didn't pass on the bowl and the robe to anybody else, possibly because he just never had it to begin with.
I love these Zen stories, but I have to admit, in the early 1990s, I was a Mahayana Buddhist myself. I was actually starting to read the Platform Sutra. Then some of the boards sort of broke and rotted away, and I fell down through the platform into a pool.
Oh, nice. Yeah, well, I mean, the Platform Sutra is, I have read it. It is good, and it's got a lot of wisdom to it. I mean, just because,
Really?
just because some of the details about it have been monkeyed with, it doesn't mean that it's all just complete bullshit. It's like a lot of Mahayana sutras. I mean, almost all Mahayana sutras were just, forgeries, essentially. They
Yeah,
didn't
there's lots of
follow.
wisdom there. I admit that. I mean, I
Yeah.
picked on the Mahayana too much. Remember, about a year ago, I made my formal apology to the Mahayana, and I went to the Shambhala Center and apologized. They kicked me out anyways, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there is one statement in the Platform Sutra, the Sutra of Huineng, that really stuck with me, and that's Huineng says that when you become enlightened, you look around and you realize that everybody else is enlightened too. It's like, when you're looking at the world through enlightened eyes, all you see is enlightenment. It's sort of like a theist. You want to talk in terms of God. It's like when you have like merged with God, you look around and you just see that everything else is just a manifestation of God. And it's kind of the same way with what Huineng was saying. It's like when you become enlightened, you look around and you see that everybody else is enlightened too. So, I mean, that was interesting. I thought that was really, that's the one part of the whole sutra that really stuck with me the best, was that statement.
So we're back to our theme, our question about the Aryans spreading Buddhism all over Asia.
Yeah, well, Bodhidharma, technically speaking, could have been Aryan, Indo-Aryan, or at least had Indo-Aryan ancestry, considering that he was a high caste Brahmin living in India. I think he might have lived in southern or central India, but still, high caste Brahmin who supposedly had like brown hair or red hair or something, then that's a good indication that he did have a lot of Indo-European ancestry. So, I mean, just the Buddhism itself was founded by an Indo-European or so-called Aryan. And yeah, I mean, in that case, he probably really was literally Aryan. And then like the early Buddhist empires were Indo-European, almost all of them. And then the spread of Buddhism throughout Eurasia, especially farther east into China and points farther east than that, like Korea and Vietnam and Japan and all that, was largely because of these Indo-European empires like the Kushan Empire that, usually it takes like a big empire for something to spread easily. Like the Roman Empire caused Christianity to spread just all through the West, or like the Mongol Empire caused like the bubonic plague to spread really fast and easy during the Middle Ages. So things good or bad can spread really easily when you've got a big empire. And when Buddhism was spreading into China and East Asia, there was like this big Indo-European Kushan or Yuezhi Empire.
How far did it get? Like, yeah, me interested. Like Vietnam and Korea, was Aryans doing that?
No. I mean, it was like there could have been missionaries, like Buddhist monk missionaries that were going there. Like even, there's the famous chronicle of the Chinese explorers that supposedly crossed the ocean and got to North America, and they had Central Asian Buddhist monks with them. And the Central Asian Buddhist monks were probably Indo-European. So they'd be, essentially European-looking Buddhist
Yeah,
monks.
I read about that. It's like 5th century AD. They came to like Vancouver Island here.
That's what they say. That's what they say. Although,
Yeah.
In that chronicle, they also talk about how the natives had domesticated reindeer, and that didn't really happen in North America, but it did happen like on the Kamchatka Peninsula of Siberia. So that might be that just as far as they got, at least with regard to the details in the chronicle. So that was kind of disappointing for me, because I used to go around repeating about the Chinese explorers with the Buddhist monk missionaries who made it to the west coast of North America, but now I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah, I remember Ash and Sona told us that story about 20 years ago. That, oh, that's so cool, and I really believed it. And now I don't know.
Yeah. Well, nothing is really certain. I mean, you can't really be certain about much of anything. Like Bertrand Russell used to say, I mean, a god with a weird sense of humor could have just created the entire universe half an hour ago and just implanted memories into our minds that of things that never really happened.
Yeah.
And there's no way you can prove that that's not the case. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no way you could prove that that's not what really happened.
Yeah. So far, your thesis makes me think that Aryan people are kind of spiritually inclined, maybe more so than other races.
I'm not sure about spiritually inclined, but they're, for some reason, they resonate well with Buddhism. You know, Buddhism is, you know, it was created by Indo-Europeans, and it spread as a result of Indo-European civilizations that had adopted it. And now it's becoming relatively popular in the West too, although in a really mutated, kind of messed up form.
Yeah, but
So
I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Frank Raymond. He published this book called Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. It's a novel about the white soul. And Frank Raymond, he's from India. He's Indian, and he really appreciates the white soul. That's why people really like his perspective on whites. And he's saying how the white soul is very imaginative, and they have this idea of, like, say, teddy bears in the forest having dinners and stuff, and it's just very creative, imaginative,
yeah,
spiritual kind of state. And he thinks that white people are like that more so than other races, more so than his own race, he says.
yeah, I do think that the like the European or Indo-European race is more imaginative and creative and has more originality. The strength of some races is just that they are conservative and follow tradition, and they're kind of rigid that way. If you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of a thing. And it worked pretty well, like for China and everything, up until the West just started developing technology and got way more advanced than them, so that
Yeah.
you know, you could just send a few thousand troops to China and just kick the ass of as many Chinese soldiers that came against you as there. I mean, like the Opium Wars were like that. They just send a few ships and they just pretty much defeat
Oh yeah,
China on
that was
Chinese
terrible. Yeah.
soil.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then the other races have had to try to play the Western game of developing technology and everything, but they're just not as good at it. And that's why, like East Asians, like the Chinese and the Japanese, they mainly just take Western ideas. The Japanese mostly honestly, and the Chinese, you know, using spies and like copyright theft and everything. And then they just improve upon ideas that Westerners came up with. So yeah, in a way, I mean, like that book that I was reading, The Trickster and the Paranormal, he's talking about how just imagination can have certain like spiritual roots to it, like paranormal roots. You know, it's like ambiguity and just sort of an absence of structure can cause like miraculous things to arise, or like really unusual, unpredictable kind of things can arise. And imagination can work that way, like what an artist could call duende, where you just kind of make your mind clear and just inspirations come up through that. So I mean the Western race, the Indo-European race, might be better at that kind of spirituality, but on the other hand, we also think too much. So that's like a handicap
Good point.
for
Yeah, good point.
spiritualities. We're so in our head that that can also be like a handicap or an obstacle or something.
So maybe white people can think up these religions and other people can practice them better than we can.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it could be kind of that way. Like, you know, the Chinese Zen masters of like 1000 AD to up to like maybe 1300, around in there. I mean, there was a lot of, you know, they just took this Indo-European idea, and, you know, it was just like a fresh new idea for them, and they really did well with it. And until, of course, eventually it all went into decline again.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating talk. Anything else on the Indo-European spreading Buddhism? Of course, now it's here all over the world now, even in Antarctica, I guess, is in the Aryans are spread all over the world, 20th century.
Yeah, well, like the Emperor Ashoka, like in the 3rd century, was it third? Yeah, I think it was the 3rd century BCE. He sent missionaries in all directions, including to the Greek kingdoms in the West. And there is some, I mean, there's kind of some evidence suggesting that like some kinds of Western monasticism were influenced by Buddhism. So that would also be some Indo-European spreading of Buddhism westwards instead of eastwards.
Yeah, I think Saint Benedict around 5th century AD in the Catholic Church, he said he got the rules from the master. This could have been the Vinaya, you know, the Buddhist Vinaya.
It's possible. Yeah, I'm not sure. I've never really studied the Benedictine order, you know, what their rules are like, see how similar they are to Buddhist monastic discipline.
You know, I got this from Ajahn Sona about 10 years ago. He went to Thomas Merton's monastery in Kentucky, you know. He came back, he gave this great talk. I hosted him at the Vancouver School Board, and he's talking about this, you know, and afterwards we realized nobody was taping the talk, so it disappeared into space. But that was his thesis. So he was convinced after visiting Thomas Merton's monastery that the master is probably, you know, the Buddha or the Buddha's.
Yeah, well, maybe it's just kind of a guess. It's like a conjecture. Although there were certain like primitive monastic sects in the West, like the Essenes, you know, like Jesus is supposedly like a student of Saint John the Baptist, who may have been an Essene. And then there was also another group called the Therapeutiae, who may have been influenced by these Buddhist missionaries who came from India back in ancient times.
Wow, so that's all Aryan influence. So one of those are Aryan monks they sent to Greece area, like Alexander, probably.
Yeah, I mean, there is mention of, they're called Yonas. They're Yona monks, and the Yonas were Greeks. It was like the Indian word for Ionian was Yona. So yeah, I mean, the Yonas are mentioned in even ancient Buddhist texts, and also like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, where you know, it's talking about the Yonas who keep invading northwestern India. And so yeah, there were Yona monks that are mentioned, and a lot of the Central Asian ones were Yona monks. You know, the ones from what is now like Afghanistan and like Eastern Iran, that kind of thing.
Wow, this is good for alt Buddhism. We've talked about that over the last year and a half, how to create more Buddhism on the right, alt Buddhism, or Buddhism appeal to Aryans. So this is an inspiring talk for them. They got to listen to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Buddhism does, I mean, especially like early Buddhism, or you know, like the Indian forms of Buddhism, it resonates with the Indo-European or the Western spirit better than a lot of other religious systems do. So, you know, it's sort of a head-oriented, in some ways, masculine kind of approach. Although
Yeah.
the whole Western civilization is kind of under attack, and they're trying to undermine it and make it more feminine and less Western in spirit and all that. But
I guess the kind of monk you are is probably more head-oriented, masculine approach to Buddhism. That's you.
yeah, I'm definitely more head-oriented than heart-oriented. You know, like
Yeah.
we did a talk probably a year ago or more, where, you know, there's like two different approaches to Dharma. You know, you got the head approach and the heart approach. And the heart approach is like seeking an end to suffering, whereas the head approach is more seeking an end to delusion. And it's, you know, you wind up with the same nirvana either way, but it's just two different emphases. And seeking an end to delusion, like the more philosophical approach, is like the more stereotypically masculine approach. And that really was, I mean, if you read the oldest Buddhist texts, they were really into that. You know, it's like you're trying to break through to ultimate reality more than you're just trying to bring an end of suffering.
Yeah, I'm trying to think which one am I. I think I had the head approach, like I'm a real truther. I want to know the truths about the world too. So I want to get over that delusion. But I'm good at loving kindness practice. I do it pretty much every day, and it feels good. It feels right for me. And I am a heart type of a person. So I'm not sure I could define myself either way. I think I'm a bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like asceticism, which was really a big thing in really early Buddhism. It's the whole idea of you just really don't care whether you're feeling pain or not. You know, it's like, or like my father, he was a macho guy, and he was like probably my first role model. And one of his sayings is, "A little pain never hurt anybody." You know, so it's like, I just learned relatively early on, it's like, you know, if you're going to be a guy, you should have a certain indifference to pain and discomfort, you know. And I've always felt like too much comfort and luxury is just kind of gay or effeminate or weak or degenerate.
Look at me, I got this big, comfortable queen-size bed here. I've got a girlfriend, whereas you're really the ascetic. You're a celibate monk for the last 30 years. I'm not up to your standard.
Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of like the masculine approach, though, is you're just trying to break through to reality more than you're trying to find an end of suffering. Although, like I said before, I mean, they both lead to the same nirvana, so you wind up in the same place either way. It's just two different emphases that you can, two different routes you can take.
Okay, anything else on Aryans spreading Buddhism?
Well, I mean, it could happen again. It's happened before. You've had Indo-European civilizations that were predominantly Buddhist. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think of Buddhism as just like an Oriental or Asian thing.
Oh, they do. A lot of people think the Buddha was fat and he comes from China. I've heard that many times.
Oh yeah, yeah. Lots and lots of people, they can't tell the difference between what was his name, Hote.
Yeah.
You know, the fat. You know,
Yeah, rub his belly.
Yeah. You rub his belly for good luck. Yeah. Yeah, they don't know that wasn't the Buddha. So
you make a good point. There could be like an Aryan renaissance within Buddhism in the future.
Yeah, it's possible. Anything's possible.
Yeah, we've got thousands of years in the future. So that is possible on the bright side.
Anything is possible.
I want to ask you, what's that picture behind you or that painting there? It looks like an owl. Is that the Owl of Wisdom?
Yeah, somebody colored it for me, so I put it on the wall.
Okay. Well, good talk. I guess we're at about 45 minutes. So this has been a good lecture. Appreciate it. So thank you kindly, Venerable Pannobhasa.
Yeah, you're welcome.